Hello and welcome to this RedMonk conversation. My name is Kate Holterhoff, Senior Analyst at RedMonk, and I am thrilled to be joined by two guests today. First is Taylor Barnett-Torabi, Staff Product Manager at Netlify, and my second guest is Lyle Schemmerling, Senior Software Engineer at FusionAuth. Taylor and Lyle, thanks so much for joining me on the Monkcast.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
This is going to be such a good conversation here. So, both Netlify and FusionAuth serve developer communities. What was the aha moment when you realized that LLMs were fundamentally changing how developers discover and interact with your documentation? Taylor, would you start us off?
Yeah, definitely. I was actually thinking about this right before this, like what was like something is different going on here. And that was last year when I realized you could get ChatGPT to basically write a site code, package it up, and like have it basically ready just to deploy straight to Netlify. It wasn't doing all we were much further along now with what that capability is, but like it was able to like, here's a zip file that you could, and here's your instructions that it told me how to go like deploy the site to Netlify. And this was before like some of the lovable, before bolts, before like all those things started really coming on the scene. So I was like, okay, this is interesting. And we were seeing people do it too. And so we're like, okay, there's something new here that, is going to only increase for sure.
Amazing. And how about you, Lyle?
Yeah, so I was just thinking about this. It was actually at GlueCon in 2023. And I remember because we were going there and I didn't realize that almost every single talk was about AI the whole day that we were there. And up till that point, I was still kind of on the, oh, it's a chatbot, it's interesting train. But, in mid 2023, it was really when like people were kind of going, oh, wow, okay, this is going to pick up and start to be a big thing. And then later I was just doing some volunteering and working with some, young kind of getting into the industry developers. And one of these guys was just showing me a conversation that he had with ChatGPT, and he was building an app with it, and he was talking with it in a way that I hadn't seen anyone interact with the chatbot before, because it was very conversational and loose, but he was also like correcting it. And I was like, oh, you don't really understand that whole sort of the nature of these things until you see someone truly interact with it. And that was sort of the eye opener for me.
Oh, man, I love the GlueCon reference as well, because a lot of what I was first introduced to around that was at what used to be GlueCon and is now, SW2Con. So I also had that experience going from booth to booth and just being like, okay, what is your AI story? Like, how are you integrating LLMs into these products that you're here to talk about? Okay, next question. So Netlify has done a lot to pioneer the idea of agent experience, or AX. I've heard Netlify's CEO and co-founder Matt speak about it at length. So I'm interested to hear how you're defining AX these days, especially for folks who maybe haven't heard this term. How do you define it?
Yeah. So, Matt's really defining it initially, came earlier this year as the like holistic experience of like using your product by like the agent using your product. And that really came from first, initially conversation in software development was UX. And then later, Jeremiah Lee, coined the term developer experience. And then this is kind of like that building on. And one thing I will say is like, there is no DX without UX, and there's no AX without DX. Like all these things really build on top of each other. And I know some people think, oh, AX is the thing, no more DX. Like what, that's out the window, old news. No, like I think it's really like they're all like building blocks on top of each other. And it's really just about like what context of experience, whether that be from an agent perspective, whether that's a developer perspective. And often at Netlify, we even split up AX kind of into different ways. There's the agent experience of using Netlify, and that's really what we focus right now with a lot of the things that we're focusing on is that. And then, our customers also have, like, what is the experience of someone who's deployed their site to Netlify? What is their customers and the agents of their customers' experience of using their sites. And so we kind of break it up to kind of make it sometimes easier to talk about. But yeah, for the most part, often we're talking about the agent experience of Netlify lately.
Got it. Got it. And is that a term that you use at FusionAuth as well, AX?
I don't think that I've actually heard us use the term AX,
Okay.
just around the shop. We've been talking about AI a lot, but that specific term we haven't brought up yet. So.
Yeah, that's totally fine. How are you characterizing speaking to these AIs and making sure that, we're going to be talking a little bit about documentation here momentarily, that you're able to communicate with them in a way that works well?
We don't really see it right now as too different from the same conversations that we have when we're talking about developers coming to our site and being able to navigate the documentation, find kind of what they need to, and have the explicit detail in there that we need. So really, it's sort of been like, okay, are we going to do the whole click here, download markdown thing? Are we going to put the LLMs not text up? But we're not really talking about it really as a separate thing. Like we still always kind of treat our docs as sort of the source of truth for an entity, whether that's an AI or not, coming to learn how to use FusionAuth.
Sure thing. Okay, that helps. All right. So, Lyle, I was interested in FusionAuth's blog, which our mutual friend Dan Moore shared with me, and it's titled How to Make Your Developer Documentation Work with LLMs. So, in that, you're mentioning that documentation sections should include enough context to be understood independently. And I think that kind of gets to what you're describing, that docs should be accessible broadly to anyone who's going to be visiting your site and looking for information about your product. So how do you balance this need for standalone content with avoiding like redundancy? And have you had to completely restructure any of your docs to accommodate these LLMs?
We haven't had anything to restructure yet. I think if you do look across the site, you can actually see there's a fair amount of redundancy just across the pages. There's little reminders and things that we have, pieces of paragraphs and instructions that we move from page to page. And that is just in service of sort of giving that whole context, kind of on one single page. Again, I don't think we're doing anything deliberately with the only goal being, sort of LLM optimization. But it is something that we're constantly talking about once we do it.
And Taylor, I want to talk about how Netlify is using AX as part of the deployment process, because I've seen this myself. I thought it was super interesting. I mean, my experience was with it is that, there's just a chatbot that comes up when you're having issues and says like, would you like my help? Yes. And then you're able to actually copy and paste some text into your own LLMs, your vibe coding tools, whatever you're using, and it will help you to make sure that your project is going to deploy better. I suspect that it's broader than that. I'm probably butchering some of the details here. So how are you integrating AX into Netlify in this sort of deep way to help users?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that, even backing up from that, is like, we realize so many of the issues that often LLMs have when it comes to like the AX of Netlify has to do with it's either operating on outdated information, old blog post, old content, things like that. And so a lot of what we're focused on is like, how can we make sure in this non-deterministic like space to give it actually like better context and direction. Like Lyle mentioned, we had initially explored things with like the LLMs.txt and different things. Then we started looking at like context files because those were becoming really popular. The context files heavily depend on the agent. There's a lot of different experiences. Sean Roberts at Netlify has like been trying to work on like how could we potentially like have some standardization around how context files are written, because the experience depends like so much on what you're using. And so like what you're talking about with why did it fail, which Netlify has had for a while, even before I joined. So I joined Netlify about a year ago. Why did fail existed even before that. It's when a build fails, you have the option of getting it to look at the logs and try to give you some better direction of like, how can you debug this? It's just another version of context, basically. And we recently, we've been continually trying to like improve it. And one of the things that was added was like a copy analysis button so that you could then take that to an agent or a chat or whatever and help you if you're not able to immediately take the direction of what the analysis is. And again, it's more context to give and more context that is a bit more specific and, that we can control a little bit more so that people have a higher chance of success of it actually helping them out. But there's other things, so like so much of this is about the context. And so that's why like when we saw MCP like servers come up, that was a really big thing for us because it was like, we really do struggle. I mean, for context, context about context, Netlify is over a 10-year-old company. There's a lot of old content out there to both help us, but also to our detriment because it's in these LLMs like data sets. And so we were really looking, and context files was like one way of us trying to combat that, of like giving them like better information to work off of. But like MCP servers have helped us so much more. Like the Netlify MCP was one of the first that you could like actually deploy a site or an app to like a platform. But for us, it's even more than that. It's like being able to use that MCP to give more context that is up to date information and access the context that the agent has, both for good and bad. That's a very powerful thing. And, definitely something that's like evolving. But, even just being able to give it better direction on like the Netlify primitives, like how to use functions, how to use our blobs, how to use, caching properly, like those little things that there's a lot of old information out there. And we see people, we'll look at their LLM generated code and be like, oh, like they're using the old version of whatever. And they have no idea. And so like the MCP server is kind of a way to kind of expand that AX and that agent experience to try to help people deal with those pitfalls that do come with using LLMs, for sure.
That is such a good point. Yeah, Lyle, I'm less familiar. Is FusionAuth, do they have an MCP as well?
Not at the moment. Again, this is something that like I've been talking to people about the last several weeks on the daily. The thing is, we're still a small shop. Like we have to do things deliberately when we do them because we only have a handful of developers. And then the other thing too is that it's still kind of a tricky space and we need to be careful, especially because it's an authentication service. So we don't want to put something out there that's going to let everybody see all your junk, right? Like that would be really, really bad. And two, the other thing is, we've got a good and comprehensive API that would be relatively simple to just sort of slap into a what I call kind of like an API wrapper, MCP server. We're not sure right now how much value that on its own provides versus maybe providing like a sort of a more curated experience, a set of tools and prompts and stuff that would allow the LLM to do what a user's typically trying to do, as opposed to just sort of give them all of the options, right?
Yeah.
Which can, I think, derail your task more than it can help a lot of the time.
Totally. Actually, and our first iteration of playing around with creating MCP server was a lot closer to that, and we realized it wasn't a great experience. And so we actually like clawed that back and then kind of locked down like to a smaller set of tasks that we felt like were a bit more curated and that we felt like, just a better experience. Because I've definitely used MCP servers where it just felt like, how is this that much better than if I just was like doing things directly with the API? It wasn't the same experience. And so a lot of the MCP servers that are better are the ones that are a lot more curated, for sure.
That's really helpful. And documentation is a really great example of like trying to walk the line between giving as much information as you want, but also, keeping in mind that there's bad actors who would want access, and you certainly don't want to do that. Yeah. Okay. Super interesting. And you mentioned the idea of like success, and I would be interested in hearing more about like how you're measuring this idea of success. So like how do you know that I guess in Netlify's case, that the agent experience is, working the way that you want, or that maybe you can even improve it? Like, how do you measure that? And then I guess, I'm also interested in like how FusionAuth is making sure that the documentation that you're creating with LLMs in mind is, doing all the necessary stuff, that it is ensuring that those developers are able to find what they want, but also that you have that discoverability that is becoming increasingly important. So maybe Taylor, would you go first?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing for us is just watching the data of how many deploys are coming from agents. I mean, that's a big one. And also ones that, looking at whether the builds are succeeding or failing is another thing. I mean, it's one thing to be able to deploy from an agent. It's another thing that the deploy is actually like a successful build. Especially when like with Netlify, you could locally build something and see if it's successful or not. And most of the time, that is a predictor of whether it there's factors that it will still fail once you push it for other various infrastructure reasons. But not all these agents are necessarily doing that local step before they actually try, to put that people are saying, yeah, go push to Netlify or whatever. And so there's things around that. We're looking at just how much people are using different things like the context files and accessing them. Are we seeing the LLMs.txt getting the traffic? What's the traffic from agents themselves? Like, we can see that, the traffic from ChatGPT coming into us. And some of this is from, we differentiate between like the crawls that are these different LLM providers are crawling our stuff to bring in the data. And then there's the actual like web search type functionality in Claude or ChatGPT and stuff that we're also watching too. And so it's kind of a culmination of a bunch of those different things and seeing, but also just like we regularly are talking to users who are using these tools and finding new areas that we want to improve and stuff. And it's hard because it honestly changes on a week-to-week basis, depending what agent released a new version or what, new models are released and different things like that. And so it's constantly something, you're chasing for sure.
And how about you, Lyle? What sort of metrics are you using at FusionAuth to gauge success?
I won't list any by name just because that is mainly domain of our we have a handful of our people in the marketing department who watch the metrics and stuff around the site religiously. And so they have a bunch of KPIs and things that they're paying attention to. But it's things like how many clicks would we get on the copy to markdown button? Was the presence of the markdown button driving traffic to or from these things? Where is the traffic coming from who got referred to? So a lot of the stuff that Taylor was kind of talking about a second ago. And then there's just little experimentation knobs, that people are playing with constantly. And it's still like a bit of a try and see sort of experimentation right now with like, okay, well, we're going to put this thing out. We see that it's getting traction with the AI community. So let's try this method out and see if it does anything, and then kind of go from there as to whether or not to continue to pursue it further. And then, to what Taylor also said, I think some of the best feedback we get is from our customers themselves. We're fortunate enough to have a lot of our customers just in Slack with us. They have channels that they can directly talk to support or the engineering team or anyone. But it's nice when they pop in and they're like, hey, I popped this into ChatGPT and it came back with this. And is this right? And it's like, yeah, sure. Or sometimes it's totally not. But the feedback on how they're using it and what they're trying to do just in person is really, really valuable.
Yeah. I'm thinking about when I've used some of these tools. Sometimes I will click the button and I'll try it, and then it doesn't work, and then I just have to like copy and paste what my prompt was to begin with. So I could see that would be, your marketing team has their work cut out for them and trying to like figure out what's actually working and what is folks trying to like figure out these new tools. I mean, everybody's workflow is changing again so rapidly. I mean, it's fun for kicking the tires. It's fun for trying new things, but I will say I kick a lot of tires these days. I'm trying all the new things. I don't know. I'm sure that these are late nights trying to suss all this out.
One really good example of that we've seen is like we have this one blog post from like 2000 and like I can't. It's I think it's like 8 years old. Something like that. That we see the LLM traffic coming into it. And so it's like, okay, we got to update it, but how do we not update it so much that it potentially affects like the traffic coming into it? And you kind of have to really like, that's something that I think a lot of companies are still like figuring out of like, there's all the different new acronyms that are basically the new versions of SEO and stuff. And I don't know, it's just kind of goofy to me right now, but I know it's very real and everything. And so like us just keeping tabs on like, oh, this thing that's old, that's getting a lot of traffic, we should make sure it at least has the most up-to-date information so that we don't lead someone down or an agent down, a person or agent down the wrong path, basically.
That is huge. We complain about at RedMonk with our language rankings about the fact that like Stack Overflow doesn't get as much traffic as it used to. And so trying to get information from sources that we used to visit all the time, suddenly they just don't have the same value for the data that we're looking for. Not to say that they're not useful, but things are shifting.
For sure.
Well, and it'll be a moving target. I mean, if you
Yeah.
know right now with a lot of these LLMs and MCP servers and some of the tools that are coming out, they can drive your browser for you and navigate to websites themselves. And to the website, that's basically indistinguishable from a human being. So as we move from I'm getting all of my information, typing things into the chatbot interface, which I think is still doing a pretty good job of letting people know that it's coming from there. As the agentic movement sort of starts to take over, I think there's going to be a lot of gray areas in the space.
And I think we're touching on this, but I want to think about how you are future-proofing documentation. So again, LLMs, they're evolving so rapidly, month to month. How are you thinking about building documentation strategies that won't become obsolete in 6 months? Is it a matter of just like going back and like measuring, what sort of things are getting the most traffic? Or is there ways that you can be, instead of reactive, like, a little proactive about this?
I think for us, I mean, docs are still your product either way. Honestly, like it's still like the representation of the product. There are no LLMs without docs and content and stuff. Like they would not exist today without it. And I don't think that's like going to change a lot. I think a lot of it, we still have to just watch of how they're going through the docs maybe, and we can make improvements there. But I don't really think, I think we're future-proofing ourselves by continuing to write docs, basically, and write good docs with useful context, and that's not a trivial thing. Like, I mean, I've heard like some people are just like, your LLM strategy should be write better docs, and I'm like, that's not as easy said as done. And so I don't think we've dramatically changed. It's more about kind of like the features to the docs that we're thinking a little bit differently, more in like how can docs be used in other ways, how can they plug into different things, and then bring that context to where it's needed, without always having to go search for that context, basically.
Okay. Lyle, do you have any sense of like ways that you're future-proofing, whether it comes to documentation or just like ensuring that all of these new AI and AI adjacent features, tools, things that FusionAuth will position itself in order to function well in this new context, this new situation that we're all in?
Yeah, I think similar, kind of the same thing in that I don't think our strategy for how we are writing docs has fundamentally changed. Good docs are still good docs, right? Do they tell you how to use the product? Can you figure it out on your own? Can you search through the stuff and get what you need to? And walk away with just enough information to do the job that you're trying to do and not get overwhelmed with all of this extra stuff. And to change the technique a little bit, I've run into a couple of situations where because I do a lot of this myself, I will be running, the LLM locally and telling it to do FusionAuth things. And there's some pages that just have too much on them, right? Like you've got context windows that are getting squished, or it's just a lot of information. So I think there's room for sort of keeping that type of thing in mind. Like there's new constraints, which were already probably really there. If you had a really, really long page, you would probably bug in some human beings out there as well. But, sort of the AI things really bring it into focus for you. And it just makes you pay attention to a couple of different things. Like we're going to try and improve our search and maybe pay attention to length and size and content of articles that we have. But we're still out to write good docs. We want people to be able to go to the website, whether they're a machine or a human, and be able to figure out what they need to do what they want to do.
So I'm not hearing that either of you are concerned about a future where developers never visit the actual documentation site, that, that direct relationship between developers, users, and the documentation, the product, that these things are not for humans any longer.
Yeah, I don't think docs are going anywhere. And the funny thing is, even if they were used less by humans, they would still need to exist on the public web for the LLMs to crawl, so they would still exist.
Point.
I think one of the things, when I use Claude or ChatGPT and different things, I always have instructions like on my account to add source links when they give me responses, because I almost always like love to check like where they're actually getting the information
Yes.
from, but also because I like to then go dig deeper, like especially if it's a thing that I'm wanting to dig deeper on. I'm really asking it like the quick questions. It's usually a little bit deeper questions, and like the source links always really help me. And often that is linking out to different companies' docs, like I often find. And so I don't think, that those are still just going to disappear. Now, I don't know if I'm an average user or, wanting to look at source links, but I know a lot of people want to look at show me the rest of the doc that came from. And, often reveals like other useful details that maybe wasn't mentioned in the first place, especially if I'm trying to debug something.
I think we all know that one person on Facebook who doesn't follow this rule, but really it's you should never, ever, ever blindly trust an LLM, and you should always go and verify the source of the information that it's talking about. Because I've had them just flat out lie to me before, which is always
Oh,
fun.
yeah.
But then a lot of times they just misread or they misinterpret. So, it's what you're saying. I will actually explicitly say, I want sources. Give me links because I'm going to go look at the stuff myself. And I think a lot of the smart people, so especially in the technical product land, the people who are used to going and hunting docs for themselves are going to use it more as like an aggregator of things to go look at than just feed me the answer and I can run
Totally.
away. Right.
Yeah.
So.
I agree.
I love having experts on the podcast because I get to ask these questions to pull back the veil a little bit. So if you're willing, I would love to hear like any horror stories that you have had with trying to, I guess, accommodate AX. Have you seen anything like really surprising now that, you need to make, all of your sites legible to these LLMs?
I don't think I have any like really bad ones. It's just like annoying things most of the time.
I would love to have just like, what? Do you have, can you share any?
I mean, it's totally, it's a thing that people I'm starting to hear are creating like unlisted docs to try to, correct issues that necessarily like the human doesn't need. Like it might already exist somewhere in the docs, but it's just not getting processed right. But like for some of these different custom AI chats and stuff, I've heard multiple people like talk about like, oh, we have this hidden doc that has this information to try to give it the context that it needs so that it does the right thing. There's stuff like that. I mean, the other thing that I've just like struggled a lot with is like when we released a new library like a couple months ago, and like the agents just were not picking it up, and so then we had to creatively ask ourselves like, are there creative solutions to that? I mean, honestly, the MCP server was like the best way to help with some of that because it had to do with some of our primitives, like the platform primitives that we have in Netlify. I mean, I don't want to have to write context files, honestly. I don't think anybody does. Like, it'd be nice if it just had it all. But like we're having to do that so that it has that latest information. It all comes down to just like the age of information most of the time for us, and in context. Like, how can we give it better context?
That really helps me out. What about you, Lyle?
Yeah, I don't know that we've had any horror stories ourselves. It's interesting because one of the things I'm paying attention to with all of this stuff, because we are a authentication and security company, is like OWASP now has a new top 10 just for LLMs and a couple of different things. And it's interesting that you're talking about like, yeah, we've got secret hidden context files that get injected and that stuff, and I suppose depending on how you do it, that could be safe, but that is literally like the number one OWASP attack vector right now is prompt injection.
Wow.
So you have to be careful about the things that your LLM is consuming. And so, that's the one that I guess maybe I care about more, is I'm not as worried about our docs necessarily not being up to snuff. I'm worried about people doing it and then getting junk mixed in there that they didn't want, whether maliciously or accidentally. And that can come back to look on you as like, I was trying to do FusionAuth stuff and then you deleted all my users. What's going on? Like, well, it's just, it's a new world of security scares that we just are not familiar with yet. So.
Yeah.
Oh man, this has been so helpful. Okay. So I'm going to wrap us up here. But before we go, how can folks hear more from you? Do you have a preferred social channel? And are you planning to be at any specific conferences, in the next couple months?
You can find me at taylorbar.net on Blue Sky. Also, that is my website. And right now, the only conference I have on my calendar is Monktoberfest. So
I love
I'll be
it.
there in a few weeks.
I will see you there.
I know FusionAuth is planning on being at some conferences up here in the near future. I'm
Okay.
not sure which ones they are. I was just at Gamescom in
cool.
Germany a couple weeks back, which was crazy. Like, it was huge and fun. And as far as contacting us, I'm Lyle.Schemmerling, or you can probably just do Lyle@FusionAuth.io. And then going to our website, our blog, our LinkedIn, like, that's where a lot of stuff happens. I'm not the most active person on social media.
Fair
My
enough.
Facebook is mostly full of dog frisbee photos, so like
No, that's reasonable. Okay, amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Lyle and Taylor. Again, my name is Kate Holterhoff, Senior Analyst at RedMonk. If you enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, and review the Monkcast on your podcast platform of choice. If you're watching us on RedMonk's YouTube channel, please like, subscribe, and engage with us in the comments.